Hello everyone, and welcome to our channel. Today we're diving into an important topic, the recent interview of Vladimir Putin with representatives of the BRICS countries. We'll be breaking down the key points and discussing the insights shared during this significant event. Stick around as we explore the details and implications of this interview. Enjoy the video, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.
So, dear colleagues, gentlemen, friends, I am very glad to see you all. Our company is expanding. The number of friends and our like-minded people within the framework of the BRICS Association has increased. The interest in the activities of the association is very great. My colleagues and I have repeatedly talked about this. And, of course, this interest is growing, including thanks to your work and your support. Information support for our work with my colleagues and friends, the leaders of the BRICS member states. The summit is coming soon. On the eve of the summit, there will be another visit by the President of the United Arab Emirates. He will arrive literally the day after tomorrow. We will have an informal dinner with him right here at home on Sunday. And the next day, on Monday, a visit. And then from Tuesday, we will start working in Kazan. A very large program is planned, and a lot has been done during the year, during our BRICS presidency. Probably, there will also be some interest in this. I will be happy to tell you in general terms. I ask you to excuse me right away. We will tell you only in general terms, because there is such a volume of information. It is impossible to carry all this volume with you. Keep it in your head, because cooperation is very diverse, multifaceted, in all directions. And here, of course, in each of these areas. I think it would be interesting for you to talk with specialists who are professionally engaged in one or another activity. Well, I very much hope that you will have such an opportunity, including you, your colleagues, your subordinates, including during the BRICS summit in Kazan. Well, that's probably all I wanted to say at the beginning. In order not to take up time, I give you the floor. And we'll try to answer your questions to the extent that I own one or another aspect of our upcoming conversation today. Please, Vladimir Vladimirovich, we are sincerely grateful that you found time to meet with us in your downright inhumanly busy schedule. But this tension is evidenced at least by the fact that in 4 days in Kazan, you will have not only a summit, not only a large-scale press conference, but also more than 24 bilateral meetings. It's hard. Here you are right, it is absolutely difficult to place in your head, but somehow. 17, that's good, about 24 bilateral meetings. This meeting that we are holding now, it is extremely important for, not only for us personally, but for the whole planet. Because the mass media are represented here, the total audience of which is literally several billion people. And we have questions that the answers to which we will convey to our viewers, listeners, and readers. I want to ask the first question, maybe such a generalizing one. The world is changing so fast that sometimes we don't even have time to keep track of how different it has become. What are the signs of these changes, and what opportunities do they provide for BRICS? The most important sign is the formation of new development centers. This is the most important sign. And this development, according to experts, whom I trust very much, and to whose opinion I listen. It will objectively go on, first of all in the BRICS member countries. This is the so-called Global South. First of all, this is Southeast Asia, this is Africa. Growth, positive growth, will be in such powerful countries as China, India. Positive growth will be in Russia and Saudi Arabia, but the countries of Southeast Asia and Africa will show faster growth for several reasons. Well, first of all, the level of development of those countries, in which positive dynamics is expected, but so restrained. First of all, this is evidenced by the fact that these countries have already reached a certain level of development. In those countries that I have mentioned, and in which there will be outstripping growth, there is still an insufficient level of urbanization, and a high rate of population growth. And these two factors, without any doubt, will play into the formation of new centers of economic growth and, after that, the development of political influence. But as for such BRICS members as China, India, Brazil, South Africa, the Republic of South Africa, then, of course, the growth of economic potential will be accompanied by an increase in their influence in the world. This is a very obvious thing. It's just an objective fact. BRICS, after all, has already been said. My colleagues, partners, and friends have said it many times. This is 45% of the world's population. This is 33% of the land. And this is a constant increase in trade turnover and the level in world trade. I have just spoken to the BRICS Business Council, to entrepreneurs from our countries, and cited the figures that I have already mentioned earlier. Well, I don't know. Yes, I didn't take everything with me. But if you look at 1992 and 2023, the growth in the global GDP of the BRICS countries combined, it doubled, and the growth of the 7 countries decreased. And according to this indicator, the BRICS country is already ahead of the 7 countries. And by the 28th year, this is quite obviously a medical fact, the gap in favor of the BRICS countries will increase. This is already an obvious thing. In some areas, humanity cannot exist without the BRICS countries in general, meaning food markets, energy, and so on. But also in high-tech areas, in particular in the development of artificial intelligence and its use. We are increasingly not only acquiring competencies, but in some areas we are becoming leaders. Therefore, this is the most important change. This is the most important, obvious, visible change that is taking place in the world. Well, this is natural. In fact, there is nothing like that here. The world is constantly changing, and leaders are always appearing. So we still need to approach this calmly, as a given, and based on this, build relationships with each other. What distinguishes BRICS from so many other international organizations? BRICS has never been built against anyone. The Prime Minister of India said very well, I think he said recently. He said that the BRICS is not an anti-Western association, it's just not Western. This is very important. This makes a lot of sense. In other words, BRICS does not oppose itself to anyone. It is simply an association of states that work together based on common values, a common vision of development. The principle of the most important thing, taking into account each other's interests. This is the base on which we will work in Kazan. Thank you very much, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Indeed, the BRICS countries represent 45% of the world's population. But if the BRICS does not make up the world majority, it certainly does. Because many countries, even non-BRICS members, are rooting for the success of this association and share values. I am pleased to introduce my colleague from China, Fan Yun, the editor-in-chief of the company, and deputy head of the Media Corporation of China, Mr. Shen.
И заместитель главы медиакорпорации Китая, господина Шеня.
And we grant the right among our guests to ask the first question, taking into account your personal relations with President Xi Jinping and the special relations between Russia and China, and then we will go clockwise. Please, Mr. Fanny. Dear Mr. President, I am very happy to represent the Chinese media at this meeting. The BRICS Kazan Summit is the first SMER after the expansion of the organization. We pay a lot of attention, together with extension. How do you think, how? About the influence of the body. You have already mentioned that the GDP, the organization, 330. How? What contribution will this not make to the development of the whole world? Now the BRICS consists of 10 countries. Each of these countries is of interest and value to the world community, and, of course, to such an association as the BRICS. Each of these countries has its own culture, its own history, and has its own advantages in the global division of labor. And cooperation with these countries is of interest to all participants of the BRICS Association. Of course, when new players appear, new participants appear, and full-fledged participants of any international organization, they bring something of their own. It is very important here that, on the one hand, they take into account the principles on which BRICS was created. It was created by 3 countries. The first step was taken by Russia, India, and China. We did it together. The BRIC was created at one time by Russia, India, China in St. Petersburg. Then it all started to expand. But, on the other hand, all members of the organization should respect the interests of the new participating countries. During this year, we have done everything that depends on Russia in order to gradually, calmly integrate all our new members into the work of the organization. After all, we have planned 250 very different organizations, very different events. and moreover in different areas. 200 events have already been held. Well, it's not by chance that we have accepted new members. There were already countries and people that we knew very well about, with whom we worked for a long time in different directions. But now, when we didn't start working, we began to work together within a single organization. Then, of course, we provided platforms for exchanging opinions and searching for possible joint projects, and in a variety of areas. And this applies primarily, of course, to economic cooperation, but not only. We pay great attention to the development of interpersonal, humanitarian ties in the field of culture, cinematography, in the field of youth exchanges, and so on. We have been working hard on all these lines almost throughout the year, and practice shows that we are on the right track. Practice shows that we have made a good, right step in terms of expansion. And, of course, I am absolutely convinced here that this will undoubtedly increase, as we can already see, interest in the organization, and influence in the world, and authority. As you know, each of these new member countries has some of their closest allies in one direction or another. And when this country gets into the association, all the countries that closely cooperate with the new member countries of the organization, they also look carefully at what is happening there, and also show interest in working together. As I have said many times, 30 countries have expressed a desire to cooperate with BRICS to one degree or another, to join the organization's activities in one way or another. Therefore, this is the visible effect of joining. Immediately after this wave, the following is growing, but here we must, together with all members of the organization, carefully look at how to treat the expansion. Exactly, absolutely, we will not push anyone away. Exactly, absolutely, the doors are open. How to build this work, it's me and my colleagues, my friends in Kazan, when we meet, we'll talk about everything. Well, that's the world majority for you. I am pleased to give the floor to my colleague from Sky News Sarabia Nadim Cottage, one of the most famous journalists in the Arab world. The authors are the hosts of the weekly program Tonight with Nadim, that is, we are absolute colleagues. So please, Nadim, your question. President, thank you very much for the opportunity to meet in Moscow. We are glad to welcome you. Introducing the TV channel, Sky. Before I start, I want to say that your team is great. Over the organization of the meeting, we are glad to what we can. We don't know Russian. I want to know what we didn't say exactly. I want everyone to understand and know this. Us, and the death of Mr. President. We have repeatedly talked about what needs to be redrawn. Maybe. This is not an indicator. We understand that. The United States is on it. The process, to some extent, a junior partner in the course of various events that occur between China and the United States. We have a unique relationship with China, it's true. They are very trusting, and the volume of trade and economic ties is growing rapidly. According to our statistics, there are about $228 billion. According to Chinese statistics, there is already a turnover between our countries. Therefore, it speaks for itself. I have already said many times, and I want to emphasize once again, that Russian-Chinese cooperation in the international arena is certainly one of the key factors of stability in the world. Strategic stability. It seems to me that this is also an obvious fact, and this position is shared by many. Our relations with the People's Republic of China are built on a mutually beneficial basis, taking into account each other's interests. This is not an empty cliched phrase. And so it really is. We listen to each other. 5, 6, 7 years ago, we met with the Chinese leadership, both at the government level and at the level of the top political leadership. I have talked with my friend President Xi Jinping many times about the need to refine the trade balance. And we need to think about what we can do to ensure that Russian industrial products enter the Chinese market in greater volume, and in the field of agriculture. The Chinese side also had relevant questions for us on energy, in some other areas, and on cooperation in space. You know, we straighten everything out, we hear each other. Now, if you look at the structure of the trade balance, there is an answer to all these questions right there. We don't just talk, we do. And we have neither seniors nor juniors. We just work in each other's best interests. And it turns out, this is not the first one. So now, as for the relationship between China and the United States, we don't get into these issues. Just as we do not get into the relationship between, say, colleagues are sitting here, and they will immediately understand what we are talking about, between Ethiopia, say, and Egypt. Do you understand what I'm talking about? We do not climb, you know, we try to find some, if there are any difficulties, and at least something depends on us. We are ready to offer our services in solving these problems if they arise. And if the participants of the relevant process are interested in our participation in some way. The largest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity, not per capita, but in terms of purchasing power parity is China. But it's still a statistic. Do you understand? The United States is in second place. Yes, per capita, of course, there is much more in the States. Well, look at how many people there are in China. 1.5 billion, there are how many billion? 300, 1,400,000,000, and how many in the United States? But the volume of the economy has become larger. The USA is in second place, India is in third. By the way, the Russian Federation is in fourth place. We are slightly ahead of Japan. This means that China's share is our number one trade and economic partner. But Russia's share is growing. And now Russia's share is the fourth in China's trade turnover. You see, it matters to everyone. Yes. We measure every step very carefully. Chinese partners are happy to purchase Russian energy carriers. This is Russia's most reliable source. Our common border is not subject to any fluctuations from the point of view of world politics, by the way. China's relations with the United States. There is no need to move anything across borders, across the sea, across the ocean. That's it, that's the common border, and that's it. And the energy resources in Russia are simply limitless. And if you look at the relationship between China and the United States, you know here, I think the states need to think. But they have spoiled relations with Russia, impose permanent sanctions, and this negatively affects them. In the end, it is reflected on them, including on the dollar. The whole world has wondered whether it is worth it, whether it is not worth using the dollar. If the United States, for political reasons, restricts the use of the dollar as a universal international unit of account. Everyone was thinking about it. And the volume of use of the dollar is slowly, but slightly, decreasing both in calculations and in reserves. And even the traditional allies of the United States are reducing their reserves in dollars. And what's going on with China? But also one sanction after another. And it's not connected with politics. This is due to the growth of China's economy and the attempt to slow down this growth with the help of various politically motivated sanctions. But you know, I want to tell you something. The United States was 15 years too late. They will not be able to stop the development of China. It is impossible to do this, just as it is impossible to say to the sun, "Don't get up, it will rise anyway." But there are objective processes of economic development. They are associated with a million factors. And this attempt to restrain the development of China, it has a negative impact on the economy of the United States itself. They make the production of a number of their products low competitive. And if they continue along this path, they will make them generally uncompetitive in a particular branch of the economy. This is how cooperation has developed over the past decade between the Chinese economy and the United States. It is interconnected. Everyone understands this. But the actions that we are seeing today from the United States, it seems to me that they are counterproductive. But this is also connected with security policy. Are these constant provocations connected with Taiwan? I often ask myself the question, when I see some provocative actions in another region of the world, why I do this. I do not understand. Now, in fact, NATO is being dragged in, and the Europeans are being dragged there, to Asia, through NATO. And no one wants, I'm a Rapitsa, to ask, do they actually want to spoil their relations with China, get out there through the NATO structure to Asia, and create a situation that will cause concern to the countries of the region, including China? I assure you, I know it's not. Nevertheless, they are being dragged there, like little dogs, by a big uncle and everything. They are activating their allies, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, creating additional points of tension, moving weapons that are quite serious, threatening the countries of the region, including China and Russia. Therefore, we are closely watching this. Of course, we do not interfere, just like in others. I have already said, we do not interfere between Ethiopia and Egypt. But we certainly proceed from the fact that China is our strategic partner and ally. Thank you. But the strength of the BRICS is that there are no seniors and juniors, and no one interferes in the relations of other countries. Indeed, a very important quality and an important intonation within this association. Vladimir Vladimirovich, I would like to introduce to you the world-famous columnist on international politics, International Arab Politics, who represents the Arab News newspaper, Faisal Abbas. Please, Faisal. Let me thank you for this opportunity to talk with you about various issues that are very important in the international arena. My question, as you know, is Saudi Arabia. The foreign minister is also invited to visit and take part in the summit in Kazan. You know, Mr. President. And the principal was busy. Since last October, he is busy with the regulation of issues in the Middle East and the solution on the state, problems with the truth. And Moscow restrained this decision of the decision. Or really,
Будет ли на саммите БРИКС
the participation of the Hediqtar he.
генсекретаря ООН?
What can we expect?
Что мы можем ожидать от
The result is to provide
делегатов,
fertilizer,
чтобы оказать
to implement a
давление,
reduction in fire about the bloodshed that is taking place in the Middle East. Given that there is full agreement among all members of the BRICS on the need to implement two-state solutions to the Palestinian problem.
всеми членами БРИКС о необходимости реализовать двухгосударственное решение.
Saudi Arabia represents. I get it. When you spoke about the ceasefire now, you were referring primarily to the Gaza Strip. So I understand you.
Yes, sir.
Our position here is very well known. I can hardly add anything new here. We have always assumed that the Security Council resolution, the Security Council decision on the formation of two states, Israel and a Palestinian state, should be implemented. This is the root of all problems. And I am sure that we will have to talk about this at the BRICS summit. By the way, I have invited the President of Palestine to take part in our events as well, and there will be an opportunity to listen to him, to listen to his assessments. But you know, I have had a lot of conversations on this topic with the Israeli leadership, with the leadership of Saudi Arabia, and with the Palestinian leadership. It is impossible, in my opinion, I told our partners in Israel. It seems to me impossible to solve the Palestinian problem solely based on issues related to the economy.
Невозможно, на мой взгляд, я говорил нашим партнерам в Израиле, невозможно, мне кажется, решить палестинскую проблему исключительно опираясь на вопросы, связанные с экономикой.
I know that the Israeli leadership, and the current one, its former leaders, have the opinion that it is enough to satisfy some fundamental basic interests of the Palestinians living in these territories, and the issue will be closed.
Фундаментальные, основные интересы палестинцев, проживающих на этих территориях.
It seems to me that in addition to the purely material nature, there are also issues related to the spiritual sphere, related to history, related to the aspirations of one or another people living in certain territories. And here the question is much deeper and more complicated. It is in this area that we need to work, the first thing. Secondly, it is necessary, of course, to work within the framework of such a broad consensus. I don't want to blame the United States for everything here, you know. But in vain they destroyed the four. No, it's true, but I don't want to poke them all the time and say that they are to blame for all the troubles. Probably not, of course. But the four were destroyed in vain. The four worked, it was easier to coordinate all positions. But they took over, monopolized this work, took full responsibility. But it didn't work out in the end. They failed with it. I think I should go back. Maybe it's not even the four to expand it, to talk about how to restore these territories, how to return people who left this territory. The Palestinians will not leave there. This is their land. We must understand this. This is the first one. And secondly, the more humanitarian problems there are, the more willing there will be to defend their interests. By the way, many people in Israel understand this. And this point of view, which I am now presenting to you, is also shared by many in Israel. And I was, and in general, have the opportunity to receive information from people who hold this point of view in Israel. We are still in contact with Israel, of course, with Palestine. We have a traditional position since the Soviet Union, which is, I repeat it again, that the main way to solve the Palestinian problem is to create a full-fledged Palestinian state.
Главный способ решения палестинской проблемы – создание полноценного палестинского государства.
Thank you very much. The next chairman of the Sangelo Group of Companies is Dr. Iqbal Serb, who is one of the most influential leaders in Africa.
который является одним из наиболее влиятельных лидеров Африки.
His group of companies includes the Independent Media Group and the African News Agency.
Independent Media и Африканское новостное агентство.
Dr. Ekbal Serve has worked with President Mandela and is a deep supporter of BRICS.
Манделой, и является глубоким приверженцем.
Please, Bal.
Пожалуйста, Игбаль.
South Africa.
Южная Африка.
Your Excellency, Mr. President. First of all, congratulations on holding a Cynic. It is a great honor and joy for me. We are gathered here today. You are one of the pioneers. You noticed correctly. From the very beginning, associations. How did you develop? Was included. Now there are new accession countries. Meet you parties. But I have a feeling that there is a feeling we may miss out. Unification is important. The world's leading. BRICS is very important. From the point of view of the world, it is very important that the global South, the global majority, had, took place, and that Russian. My question is addressed to you directly. Like you, Russia is active. It can accelerate the mechanism for BRICS to play a more important role, both economically and in settlement systems, and, more importantly, in political terms too. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, as for... I'm sorry, as for the political structure. This is where your Egyptian colleague is. I kind of got away from this part. But since you have returned to this, I will return to the initial part of his question. He said that we, here I am, we declare and strive for the reconstruction of the world order. We are not striving, really. This happens naturally. We are simply saying that this is an inevitable process, and we must respond accordingly. After all, these new centers of power that are emerging, they are not emerging. Because Western countries have brought the Ukrainian crisis to the point, and everything has led to the state in which it is. Well, I'll just remind you again. In the 2014 year, Western countries led by the United States organized, or did not organize, then supported a coup d'etat. This was the beginning of the whole crisis. And then they began to interpret NATO there for many years. That's where the crisis started. And the war began in the 2014 year, because those people who did not agree with the coup d'etat began to carry out armed actions against them with the use of armed forces. This war began in the year 2014. But changes in the world began to happen earlier and began to happen on a huge, large scale. This is what we call the creation of a multipolar world. And we just proceed from the fact that this is happening, and we are contributing, and we are trying to contribute, in such a way that it does not lead to destruction, but on the contrary, so that everything is calmly built up, in a new, growing format. You say that we need to act more actively. And how to be more active? In our opinion, the fuss is out of place here. We act progressively, step by step, step by step. That's about finance. Yes, we have not abandoned, say, the dollar as a universal currency. We were denied its use. But now 95% of all foreign trade in Russia, it is carried out with our partners in national currencies. Do you understand? Well, that's what they did with their own hands. Well. They thought everything would collapse. No, nothing collapsed. It is developing on a new basis. 95% of our trade with China is the ruble and the yuan. By the way, the yuan is also used by us in settlements with third parties, which contributes to the strengthening of the yuan as an international monetary unit. Not because China wants to hurt anyone. No, he's not doing anything wrong to anyone. And just like that, the situation of circumstances develops. This is the first one, calculations in national currencies. We have created a bank headed by Ms. Ross. There's still a lot to do. We need to work on capital, we need to increase capital, we need to. Well, I'm not going to list everything now. Ms. Rua and I have met several times. She is a good specialist, understands everything. We need to talk about how to create an appropriate insurance platform. So, a pool of reserve currencies. All this needs to be gradually strengthened. It is necessary that these are not declarations, but really working tools. This is what happens. Right now, we want to propose to our colleagues, I won't talk in detail yet, but we want to propose such a serious attitude. Such a serious issue. This is the issue of using digital currencies in investment processes. And not only in the BRICS member countries, but also in the interests of the BRICS member countries in other developing economies that have good prospects for development, as I have already said. Moreover, we can make such a tool that will be practically non-inflationary. It will be under the control of the relevant BRICS institutions. This could be another very interesting good step in the development of the Global South, and with our direct active participation. We're going to talk about this now. Well, not now, I'm going to talk to my colleagues. We are already consulting with Chinese friends, Indian friends, and Brazilians, and we have just held consultations. And we will definitely talk to South Africa. We will do this with everyone. We're doing it. We are going gradually. But it seems to me that this is not enough. After all, in order to work effectively in the economy, it is necessary to bring people closer together. We have all our traditional, so-called traditional values and Chinese culture, from Christian culture and Islamic culture. They are, in fact, if you translate from one language to another, it's the same thing. They are all very close or, as diplomats say, completely coincide. Here, but it is necessary that people realize this, understand it. There are no enemies, there are only like-minded friends. And that is why we are developing an appropriate program in the field of museum business, in the field of theater business. Now, this year, on the initiative of Russia, even a single platform has been created in the field of folk dance art. In the field of cinematography, theater, exhibition activities. All this creates a colossal, solid, should create and, I am sure, will create a solid, good base for saving people. So my colleagues and I are constantly holding relevant thematic years, the year of culture, the year of youth exchanges, the year of theater, and so on and so on. This also brings people closer together, creates numerous contacts, opportunities to increases each other's trust, which is the most important thing. Confidence increases. And this is a necessary basis for cooperation in the field of economy and security. That's why we will not rush, but we will move as fast as possible. It is also impossible to lose this pace here. I agree with that. You're right. Thank you. But in fact, we are talking about creating a common cultural market of the BRICS countries, which will also promote cooperation in the field of economic security. The next Indian guest is Vladimir Vladimirovich. This is an influential news agency and Sudhakar Nair, working at the age of 5 or 45. Went from correspondent to executive editor, worked in Germany and in the Prime Minister's pool. Please, Judge Hakar. Thank you very much, sir. This is the 6th time. Lighting. Negotiations of India. I wanted to ask a question, which are related with. In India, tourism is very well developed. Who is 40, 50, and so on. Is there an opportunity for producers from the BRICS countries to make films and open the market and some incentives? You know, if you look at all the BRICS countries, then Indian cinema is probably as popular in Russia as anywhere else in the BRICS country. We even have a channel, in my opinion, a separate channel on television, which turns Indian cinema day and night. Therefore, we have a very big question of interest in Indian cinema. The first one. Second, we hold BRICS film festivals at Moscow film festivals. And this year at the Moscow Film Festival, all films from almost all BRICS countries were presented, in my opinion. The work of directors from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and a third country won. I don't even remember Jordan, in my opinion. Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan. Here is the winning picture of 3 directors from these countries. As for the economic side of the matter, cinematography products are just like any other products. They are part of the market, which should be regulated accordingly. India has made a lot of decisions to protect its own market, and this applies not only to cinematography, but also to the automotive market and other areas of activity. But we are sure that if our Indian friends have such an interest, then we will undoubtedly find a common language to promote the products of Indian cinematographers on the Russian market. And I can say that this product is in demand on the market in the broadest sense of the word, at least in Russia. This, along with Indian pharmaceuticals, I think will be a good business. I will be ready to talk to our friend, the Prime Minister of India, when he comes to Kazan, if he raises this issue. But we are sure that we will agree 100%. I don't see any difficulties here at all. Thank you, Vladimir Ilyich. But, of course, I would like to see more than just Indian cinema. I would like to see a movie with actors from the BRICS countries representing their different cultures. Yes, but so that there was an Indian, a Chinese, an Ethiopian, and so on. You know, we talked. We have talked with our colleagues, with the leaders of the BRICS countries, about organizing festivals and theatrical art. And this is being carried out now, and we have created, in my opinion, a joint cinematography academy. And we will definitely follow this path. We talked about the need to create pop music festivals and so on, and so on. There is a lot of work here, as we say. there is something to work on. This work is very interesting. And of course, the press will also be interested in covering this and participating in this joint work. Yes, but in the Soviet Union, there was such an experience as Mimino, for example. Caucasians, Russians, or Ukrainians participated in war films when actors from different cultures or close cultures are also such an interesting direction. Guests from Ethiopia. CEO of the media company Fana Broadcasting. It is Ethiopia's largest media corporation, broadcasting in 9 languages. I'll give you tickets for Massa. Please. Excellency, Mr. President. Thank you very much for the opportunity. We can make a projection so that our infrastructure, technological and educational projects bring real added value and are commercialized. Excuse me, in what area? How can we make sure that we monetize cooperation projects on infrastructure in the technological sector and in the field of education? As for the field of education, let's start with this. We have traditional, very good and positive ties, and very good experience in training personnel for Africa. But this has been the case for decades since the Soviet Union. Thousands of people from Africa have been educated here. Many of them still occupy very important positions in their countries today, having been educated in Russia, which makes us very happy. Because at the last Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg, we saw such pictures that pleased, I think, millions of Russian citizens. Because our mass media and television, the internet showed. Russian songs are sung by today's civil servants from some African countries, and they sing in a fairly good Russian language. And of course, this is a very powerful potential for interaction, cooperation, education received in one or another country, in the language, especially of the host country. We continue this practice. Now I'm afraid to just make a mistake in the numbers, but almost not with all countries of Africa, then with many for sure. And this also applies to Ethiopia. The second question is no less, or the second part of your question. You asked it as the first. It is no less important. This infrastructure. We have a lot of projects in this area, in the development of infrastructure. And the most famous, significant, global ones. This is a well-known North-South project already known to many interested colleagues. This is a railway line from the Baltic Sea to the Persian Gulf. We are doing this with many of our partners who show interest, including those who are ready to participate in financing this project. This is the second very large route. This is the North Sea route. This is along the Arctic Ocean. And here we do a lot. This is a global route, and many BRICS member countries are showing great interest in it. Because it gives a route in its own way. If it is implemented by us, it gives very great economic advantages. As for, yes, and here we are doing a lot. This is a practical job. We are building an ice-breaking fleet that does not exist in the world. There is simply no such, say, nuclear icebreaker fleet in the world, except for Russia. I think we have 7 nuclear icebreakers, 34 diesel icebreakers, and very high-class. They are powerful, modern. A leader icebreaker is also being built, as we call it, which will generally chop any thickness, any at all. And it will work all year round. Well, as a matter of fact, the wiring of ships there, in my opinion, has already reached 9 months. Therefore, this is a very interesting big project. As for Ethiopia, we have traditional deep relations, and spiritual and humanitarian ties are very good. And many of our companies are interested in working in the Ethiopian market. These are energy and engineering companies. And I would very much like all the plans that the Prime Minister and I talked about to be implemented. For our part, we will do everything for this. We will chop ice of any thickness. It's, well, for Ethiopia. Maybe it's not so interesting at this point in time. But for countries such as India, China, and many countries in other regions of the world, economic interest is of great interest. And that is why we are discussing this both within the framework of BRICS and on a bilateral basis. And we are ready to work of this kind with our BRICS partners as well. Egypt's leading news agency Mina Salaheldin Magori. Please.
Господин президент,
I'm being called.
меня зовут Салах.
I represent
Я представляю
agencies.
информационное агентство МЕНА из Египта.
Thank you so much for
Большое
inviting
спасибо
me
за
to the meeting.
приглашение на данную встречу.
Of course, we know that the position of the Russian Federation rightly takes into account the issues on the agenda and strives for cooperation,
Принимает во
not
внимание интересы
interference in
всех.
others.
И Россия стремится к сотрудничеству, а не вмешательству в дела
In
других.
particular, we see that Russia supports the aspirations of the side countries
Мы
that
видим,
seek
что
to
Россия
join,
поддерживает устремления различных стран, которые стремятся к вступлению в нее.
and we understand that ourselves.
Мы понимаем, что саммит
There are a lot of
происходит
calls
в
going on.
турбулентное время, множество вызовов и угроз,
We
которые
see.
сегодня мы видим на мировом уровне.
I would like to hear your
Хотелось бы
opinion on the development of
услышать
economic
ваше видение
cooperation
будущего
and strengthen it,
сотрудничества между
including national ones.
членами группы БРИКС и модальностями расширения этой группы, в частности, в экономическом срезе. Особенный интерес представляет общая единая валюта БРИКС, которая могла бы поспособствовать развитию экономического сотрудничества и укрепить в том числе и национальные валюты.
What are the long-term
Каковы
steps in this regard?
шаги на долгосрочную перспективу в этой связи?
And as for the BRICS single currency, we are not considering this issue at the moment. He hasn't matured. We need to be very careful. Here we have to act gradually, slowly. At the moment, we are studying the possibilities of expanding the use of national currencies and creating tools that would make such work safe. As I have already mentioned and said, we are now considering the possibility of using electronic tools, the need. Such work is underway to establish relations between central banks and ensure a reliable exchange of financial information. That would be independent of those international financial information exchange instruments that impose certain restrictions for political reasons and violate the principles of the global economy.
ограничения по политическим соображениям и нарушают принципы мировой экономики.
We will expand this action, the work of the floor of currencies, and strengthen the BRICS Bank, the new BRICS Bank. We will follow these directions. In order to talk about creating a single currency, it is necessary to have a very high degree of integration of economies. And not only that, it is necessary not only to have a high degree of integration of economies, but also to achieve their comparable quality and volume. Volume, it is impossible, meaning the population and the economies themselves. But the economy in its structure, in terms of efficiency, they should be approximately equivalent. Otherwise, we will face the same problems, and even more than the problems that arose, say, in the same European Union. When a single currency was introduced for those countries whose economic levels were not comparable, were not equivalent. Therefore, this is a distant prospect, but theoretically it can be. We can talk about it in the future. Now, as for the extension. Extensions. Here we are now, one wave of expansion has passed, the expansion of the BRICS, and, of course, it is not by chance that our colleagues have raised questions here. But here is what we are doing in order to adapt the new members of the organization to work together. This also requires a certain amount of time. Despite the fact that we have been working with each other for a long time, but nevertheless, we still need to work within a single organization. As I have already said, interest in the work of the BRICS and participation in the work is growing. 30 states have expressed their desire to work with BRICS. Therefore, we are now working together with our colleagues, and I will talk about this with our friends in Kazan. With the leaders of the BRICS countries, developing such a category as the BRICS partner countries. And the first step will be to build this work. But for Russia, these are primarily the CIS countries, the countries of the Eurasian Economic Union. But we will also be happy to invite people from other regions to work with these countries. This is the first one. Secondly, consensus is needed here, of course. And we will act carefully in this regard. And guided by two principles. The first one is versatility, and the second one is the effectiveness of the organization's work. In other words, by increasing the number of members of the organization, we should not minimize the effectiveness of the structure itself. Therefore, guided by these considerations, we will act. Yes, now the first question, was like this. That's two. Is that all, or is there something else I'm asking you to do? Expansion of the single currency. Well, yes, prospects. Well, one thing is more precise, Vladimirovich, you. What? What again? What are the prospects?
Каковы перспективы и будущее группы BRICS,
In your opinion,
на ваш взгляд?
I have already said that new development centers, new centers of power are being formed, and therefore, all of them are practically represented in BRICS. In this sense, of course, BRICS has a great future, in my opinion. We have great respect for other regional associations and try to cooperate with them. And, frankly speaking, despite all the conflicts in the current situation in the world, it seems to me that the development of BRICS, if it develops on the basic principles that I mentioned at the beginning, namely, not confrontation, not working against someone, but only exclusively in the interests of the country of this organization, then it will have a beneficial effect. on the situation in the world as a whole.
Он благотворно, эта работа благотворно скажется и на ситуации в мире в целом.
We are not building a block against someone's interests.
Блока, понимаете? Направлено против чьих-то интересов.
This is not a block organization. And in this sense, it has a universal character and, in my opinion, will have a beneficial effect on world affairs in general, including the global economy.
Если она будет
If this work helps the development of the world economy, then in this sense, it will be useful for those countries that are not members of this BRICS organization.
тех стран, которые в эту организацию БРИКС не входят.
It goes without saying, I think, of course, and today's world economic leaders, too, in my opinion, will ultimately benefit from this, despite the fact that many of them face certain problems today.
Несмотря на то, что многие из них сталкиваются сегодня с определенными
But we know the problems of the Eurozone. It is teetering on the brink of recession as a whole.
на грани рецессии в целом.
And if good relations, the economies of these countries are stable and established with the BRICS countries, well, it will only benefit them. But in the United States, yes, they will have, apparently, decent growth this year, over 3%.
Будет, судя по всему, приличный рост, свыше 3%.
They jumped so decently after the pandemic, the economy grew by 5 and 7% in the United States, then fell to 2.5%. But this year there will be a little more, there will be more than 3. But there are still a lot of problems. The foreign trade deficit, in my opinion, is over $700 billion, $718 billion. The budget deficit is $1.8 billion.
И 0,8 миллиарда.
That's a trillion.
Триллион. Так? И
And the state debt is $34.80 trillion.
4,8 триллиона долларов.
In other words, such large leading economies have a lot of problems.
Крупных ведущих экономик очень много.
And normal relations with the BRICS countries, and we are open to these formal relations, well, in my opinion, have a beneficial effect on the global economy as a whole. Vladimirovich, one clarification. You said that the BRICS countries are working on a reliable exchange of financial information. Is this a step towards a single payment system? This exchange, it's like. This is the exchange of financial information between central banks. Well, this is to create an analog.
Создание аналога SWIFT.
This is an analog of SWIFT. An analog of SWIFT.
Это
This is what provides international settlements.
Спасибо.
Brazil, CNN Brazil. Daniel Rittner, editorial director. He was included in the list of the most respected journalists in Brazil, according to the Brazilian magazine Journalist and Company. Please, Daniel.
President Putin,
Господин президент, большое спасибо за эту возможность.
First of all,
Во-первых,
I want to say
хочу
they
сказать,
perceived it.
что помню о Казани. Приезжал туда в 2018 году в отпуск. Очень хорошо воспринял это. Но
Then they were
когда
expelled.
нашу международную команду исключили, и мы плакали всю
But I'm
ночь.
talking about what you're
Казани,
so
потому
careful
что
about.
Вы так тщательно готовитесь к саммиту.
And we're in.
И мы в Бразилии тоже готовимся к другому саммиту.
Namely, the Big
Именно
20,
саммиту
which will
Большой
take
двадцатки,
place.
который пройдет в ноябре.
The Brazilian government has invited you.
Пригласила вас приехать на саммит лидеров Большой двадцатки, но система правосудия в стране независима.
And some curtains on separate ones.
И говорят некоторые, что нужно будет выполнить предписание Международного уголовного суда и связанного с ордером на ваш арест. В этой связи есть 3 отдельных вопроса с моей стороны.
Are you planning to
Планируете ли
come
вы приехать на
in
саммит
Rio de
в
Janeiro?
Рио-де-Жанейро в ноябре? И с учетом вышесказанного,
Do you think
считаете ли вы, что ситуация, о которой я сказал,
shows weakness,
показывает слабость БРИКС на фоне старых
such as in
организаций, таких
Brazil,
как МУС, И со всем уважением, боитесь ли вы ареста в Бразилии?
So the first thing I want to say is that the International Criminal Court does not have universal significance. This is one of the international organizations whose jurisdiction Russia does not recognize, as well as many other countries of the world. In my opinion, the United States also does not recognize, China does not recognize, Turkey. Therefore, the fact that such an organization exists, in fact, yes, if such an independent organization exists. But maybe it's not bad, but it needs to take on such a universal character. This is the first one. Second, a solution of this kind is very easy to get around. Well, it's just really easy. It is enough to sign an intergovernmental agreement, and that's it, and the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court will be limited. If we have very good relations with Brazil, reliable and stable for many years, decades. Therefore, by and large, it is possible to sign an intergovernmental agreement, and no one will be put in a difficult position. That's all, and it's over with the ends. Now about independence. But I would not like to escalate anything here, but nevertheless we know that the International Criminal Court has announced that it is going to make a decision regarding some political figures from the Middle East. And then the United States shushed him, and he shut up. And where is it all? Therefore, respect for such an organization, which is not universal, and is not independent, unfortunately, it is small. It is on a low profile. And finally, the most important thing. Well, first of all, we have a difficult situation. The Ukrainian crisis is far from over, right? And secondly, and most importantly, we understand that, in principle, the 20 is a good forum. It is useful in general, if, of course, it is not politicized, if it is not further politicized. Various attempts are being made there, but it was created, and it was created not so long ago, but as a purely economic platform. So, if it develops in this way, it will be useful. But we understand what is happening around Russia. And I understand. I have excellent friendly relations with President Lula. Well, I'm going there on purpose to disrupt the normal operation of this forum. Well, we understand perfectly well, and I understand that it's nothing but there, even if we exclude this moose, but this conversation will only be about that. We will actually disrupt the work of the 20. Why? We're adults. Therefore, we will find who in Russia will adequately represent the interests of our country in Brazil at a high level. Thank you. That is, we treat the 20 carefully. Vladimir Vladimirovich, we treat everyone carefully, except the enemies. Vladimir Vladimirovich, well, you mentioned the Ukrainian crisis. Just yesterday, speaking at the EU summit in Brussels, the overdue President Zelensky said that the only alternative to Ukraine's accession to NATO would be to acquire nuclear weapons. And in a coordinated manner, the Bild edition published an interview with an anonymous Ukrainian technician who said that it only takes a few weeks in Ukraine to create its own nuclear weapons and then strike at Russian troops. What does it all mean anyway? This is another provocation. It is not difficult to create a nuclear exterior in the modern world. I do not know if Ukraine is capable of doing this now. It's not that simple, but for Ukraine today. But in general, there are no big difficulties here. everything is clear how to do it. This is a dangerous provocation, because it will certainly be, and any step in this direction will be met with an appropriate reaction. This is the second one. And the third and most important thing. It lies in the fact that the political leadership of today's Ukraine has repeatedly talked about this, even before the crisis turned into a hot phase. Even then, before that, they stated so relatively mildly, but nevertheless they said, that Ukraine should have had nuclear weapons. And such a threat will provoke an appropriate reaction from the Russian Federation. I can say right away that Russia will not allow this under any circumstances. And it will not turn out that the British, for example, can plant these nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and then they will say, here they did it themselves. They wanted to, so they did. Well, here, you know, there can't be a subjunctive mood. Let's not speculate on the coffee grounds. The British or whoever else will give you a lift. It's hard to hide. This is the same as the corresponding fund. Appropriate actions are needed. It's impossible to hide it, like an all in a bag. It's impossible to hide it. And we are able to trace any movement in this direction. Yes, please, Saudi Arabia. Thank you, Mr. President. Based on our, I want to, an error. This is our decision. I would like to continue the discussion in Ukraine. Don't let me. You thanked the opposition of Saudi Arabia and the assistance in the exchange of prisoners. Like you, as everyone knows, the friendship was close between a number and Moscow, and there is also a friendship between a number and Kim and the Crown Prince. In an interview with Fox News, said that Saudi Arabia is doing everything possible to help solve the crisis. What is your assessment of Saudi Arabia's efforts? Many members assumed the solution. The solution. They said that Ilya is close to Ukraine and Russia. Can Russia take part in a peace conference if it is held in a friendly country, for example, Saudi Arabia, in the near future, before the end of the year? You have just mentioned the friendly relations between Russia and Saudi Arabia. And so it is. We view Saudi Arabia as a friendly side to us. I have very good relations with the king and such comradely, friendly relations, personal with the Crown Prince. And I know, I'm just sure, that everything Saudi Arabia does in this direction, it does sincerely. I have no doubts here. And therefore, if such events are organized in Saudi Arabia, of course, the venue itself is quite comfortable for us. But that's not the question. The question is what to discuss. As you know, we have been negotiating for a long time in Turkey, in Istanbul, and the result of these negotiations was a document that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He put his signature there. It is available, this document. This is a draft agreement, and the squeeze from it, I repeat once again, is initialed by the head of the negotiating delegation. But if Ukraine put its signature, it means that everything was fine there. In any case, some fundamental things. It was possible to talk about some details, to refine, yes. But to throw it in the trash, this document, it seems to me, is completely incorrect. So you can throw any document in the trash. Therefore, we are ready to conduct a dialogue after the end of the conflict, but only on the basis of the document. That was prepared during extensive negotiations over several months and initialed by the Ukrainian side. We are ready to continue working on this basis. There is an initiative of China and Brazil, which takes a very balanced approach to settlement issues, objectively. And a corresponding group has been created in New York. We are watching this very carefully, with respect, and we understand that all our friends, including the BRICS members, are determined to end this conflict as quickly as possible and by peaceful means, because we are aware that this, of course, is an irritant element in international affairs and European affairs, the economy, and so on. And we, like no one else, are interested in completing it as quickly as possible, and, of course, by peaceful means. I repeat again, are you ready to come back? We didn't interrupt the negotiations. I want to remind you that it was the Ukrainian side that said that it would not continue negotiations with Russia. The first one. Second, a decree of the President of Ukraine has been issued prohibiting negotiations with us. The decree is in effect. Let him cancel at least this decree to begin with. Well, it's ridiculous to even say that. Everyone is calling on us to negotiate, and the fact that the Ukrainian side has forbidden itself to negotiate. Is no one paying attention to this? This is ridiculous. But the most important thing is the base. The base is a draft document developed during the Istanbul negotiation process. Yes, thank you. We are already forming a queue. Please, the United Emirates, then South Africa, and then Brazil. Please, Emirates.
Господин президент, ваше глубокое понимание военных стратегий, возможно, вы
We have noticed a lot of debts lately.
в поведении российской армии в той войне, которая продолжается очень
More
долго,
than you.
больше, чем вы
Waiting.
ожидали. Вы
Is it?
чувствуете ли
Some kind.
какие-то
It was happening.
удивления,
Surprise, maybe
разочарования,
disappointment.
в
Implementation of
выполнении
Russian.
армией своих задач? И второй вопрос. Как вы
How can you
Как вы
determine
можете
when you will
определить,
achieve
когда
victory
вы
in
достигнете
Ukraine?
победу на Украине?
You know, setting some deadlines is such a very difficult thing, and it is generally counterproductive. We have just talked about the possibility of peace talks. This is 4. And I said how it can be implemented. And if this is a completely sincere position from the other side, please, the sooner the better. Now about the army. As you know, the modern way of conducting armed struggle is changing very quickly due to technological progress. And today for tomorrow, it is already quite difficult to give an absolutely accurate assessment of what will happen. Moreover, it was recently said that the modern way of conducting armed struggle is the confrontation of technologies. Yes. Today, I have already heard from our participants in the fighting, imagine, from the participants in the fighting, that the modern war is the war of mathematicians. Because here is a very specific example. Because, let's say, the means of electronic warfare, confrontation. They work for certain specific means of destruction and suppress them. The other side considered, realized that it was opposed, and changed the software of its strike weapons. Within a week, 10 days, 3 weeks, the other side increases its efforts and changes the software of its electronic means of suppression. It goes on endlessly. Well, of course, it is absolutely clear that the Ukrainian army is not able to do this. As well as using high-precision and long-range means of destruction, because they simply do not exist. It is clear that NATO is doing all of this. A NATO country and a specialist, NATO military specialists. Do you know what the difference is? It means that NATO is at war with us, but with the hands of Ukrainian soldiers. Ukraine does not spare its soldiers in the interests of third countries. But Ukraine does not use high-tech weapons itself, NATO does it. And the Russian army is fighting itself, and it creates military products itself, and it makes software itself. And that's a huge difference. And this is especially so lately. I'm recording this, and I see that the Russian army, of course, is becoming not just one of the most high-tech, but also the most combat-ready. And when we are there, it's when NATO gets tired of fighting with us. Ask them that too. We are ready to continue this fight. And the victory will be ours. Victory will be ours. Please, South Africa. Everything is big, sir.
Когда я слушаю некоторые вопросы и комментарии, которые вы даете, очень хорошо, что я в Кейптауне.
In fact, there are no processes, but still I am at the same time.
Всех этих процессов, но все-таки я размышляю при этом.
Does Mandela need to be modern? And, for example, the leader. And with your leadership, he can present such a Mandela moment to the world, because any war ends in peace. This is a prerequisite throughout history. And we need to find a way to this world. And very often, the path to peace is not just because it is changing. Technologies of modern conflicts. Because in this way, people, but I have contradictory ones. Mr. President, on the one hand, I believe that you are a supporter of peace and want peace both in Russia and in the Middle East and in other parts of the world. But before we started today's meeting, the Turkish minister met us with his colleagues. Middle Eastern mostly. I made several statements. He said, for example, among other things, what is? There is a very high probability of war between Israel, and perhaps you have already read this statement. And of course, it will have devastating consequences for the region. Or a question I want to ask you. What do you think about it, Mr. President? Could you intervene so that Russia could BRICS? To do, and what could the BRICS organization do in order to avoid this? Thank you. Yes, this is a difficult situation, dangerous, of course. I just spoke to your colleague about what is happening on the Ukrainian track, in the Ukrainian direction, and said that NATO is fighting with us with the hands of Ukrainian soldiers, and Ukrainian soldiers are fighting with Russian equipment. And we do everything ourselves. We are fighting and making equipment ourselves. Do you understand? The difference is colossal in fact. NATO members do not feel sorry for Ukrainians. No soldiers. They serve the interests of the United States. In this sense, they are not sorry either. But we have to think. We think about our soldiers. We think about technology, and when we think about our soldiers, we think about how to ensure peace, including nerve agents. That's the difference in what? That's the huge difference. We do not hand over decrees and decrees banning negotiations. We say, we are ready. On the track of Iran, the Israeli track, everything is also very acute. They will fight there. If it comes to that, God forbid, the soldiers of both sides will fight directly. We are in contact with Israel and in contact with Iran. We have quite a trusting relationship. And we would very much like this endless exchange of blows, as it may turn out, to be stopped at some point.
Бесконечный, как может оказаться, обмен ударами, он в какой-то момент был остановлен.
And that such ways of decoupling the situation that would satisfy both one and the other side should be found.
Развязки ситуации, которые удовлетворили бы как одну, так и другую сторону.
But it is always the answer to this question, always lies in the way of finding compromises.
Лежит на пути поиска компромиссов.
Are they in this situation or not?
Нет,
I think so.
что да.
No matter how difficult it may be, but it is, in my opinion, possible.
На мой взгляд, возможно.
It's just that it's a very delicate area. To get ahead of ourselves and say something publicly now, it seems to me, is counterproductive because it can only do harm.
Потому что может только нанести вред. Но
But the search for solutions of this kind, it is very much in demand.
он очень востребован.
And we, of course, if the parties to the conflict are interested in this, we are ready to participate absolutely sincerely, with an understanding of the interests of both one and the other side.
Стороны конфликта в этом заинтересованы. Мы готовы поучаствовать абсолютно искренне с пониманием интересов как одной, так и другой стороны.
As for Iran, we have simply allied relations with Iran, and we have a very fine sense of what is happening in this country. We have a fine sense of what is happening in various spheres.
Тонко чувствуем, что происходит в различных сферах.
And then listen to how to comment on what was happening in Iran, these strikes from Israel.
Комментировать то, что происходило в Иране, вот эти удары со стороны Израиля.
So how do I comment on this? But on the other hand, of course, we always say this and I want to emphasize this. We are against any terrorist manifestations.
Против любых террористических проявлений.
Any? Including against Israel and against Israeli citizens. We should not forget about this either. But nevertheless, when asked if compromises are possible, it seems to me that it is possible. And if,
Если это будет востребовано, мы в контакте с одной и с другой стороной.
it will be in demand. We are in contact with both sides, and we are ready to do everything that depends on us,
Пожалуйста, братья.
in order to help in finding these compromises.
Let me please.
Please, Brazil,
Позвольте мне вернуться
allow me.
к плану из 6 пунктов, которые предложили Китай и Бразилия. Вы
Which
рассматриваете
offered.
возможность начать переговоры за столом переговоров.
You are considering the possibility of starting negotiations with negotiations on the terms that were offered from Brazil.
Президент Украины Зеленский назвал этот
Mr.
план
President Zelensky called this
сказал,
plan
что
cutting,
президент
said that it was to
Лула
germinate, Zelensky's quote.
слишком пророссийский. Это цитата Зеленского. Считаете ли вы, что господин Лула
Do you think that?
союзник, и может ли он сыграть роль в переговорах между Россией и Украиной?
Can he play a role in the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine? You know, what China and Brazil have proposed is to create a corresponding group in the UN. A plan is a corresponding proposal. We didn't know anything about it. Therefore, that is, not Brazil, not China, but these countries are very close to us. In the search for solutions to a peaceful settlement, they did not consult with us. They acted as they see fit. This is good, this is bad, another question. But it just says that both Brazil and China are acting independently. They are not playing along with anyone. Including Russia is not playing along. I say this quite responsibly, publicly. This can be spread in any media. And our foreign minister reported to me from New York about what is happening. And without any prior consultations from Brazil and China. And I think that, on the whole, these are balanced proposals. Balanced, aimed at finding a peaceful solution. If someone doesn't like it, but that's their position. As I have already said, the Ukrainian side does not consider it possible to conduct any negotiations at all. She just formulates some of her demands, and that's it. It's not a negotiation. They held talks with us, but stopped them after the agreements were reached in Istanbul. That's it. And now they don't want to. It was only recently that the head of this Kiev regime, when he was in New York, again publicly stated, he also publicly said, "We will not conduct any negotiations." Well, what should I add to that? Does someone like it there in Kiev, or does not like the offer of Brazil and China? But this is their choice. We got acquainted with the proposals of China and Brazil only after they appeared publicly. I can tell you what to repeat again. It seems to me that this is a good basis for making attempts to find measures.
Да, пожалуйста, Индия у нас.
Yes, please, we have India.
Мой
Already.
вопрос, резюмирует разные вопросы, он связан с украинским конфликтом. Было
It is
сказано, что
connected with the
Китай и
Ukrainian conflict.
Бразилия могли бы
It
быть
was said that
последним
India,
потенциальным
China, and Brazil would be the latter confidential.
А наш премьер-министр Нарендра
Upon
Моди
termination,
общается и с вами, с
our
американским
prime minister
президентом,
is
с
reported,
президентом. Как вы
and with
считаете,
you,
вот такая
with the American
возможность
president, with the
посредничества,
Ukrainian
она,
one.
в
Do you
ближайшее
think
время
this is a
насколько
possibility of mediation? Is it realistic in the near future? You know, just now your colleague asked a question about the events and tension on the Iranian-Israeli track, and I replied that if something depends on Russia, and if our mediation is in demand, then we will be happy to work with colleagues. The same goes for our friends, whom we fully trust. I am referring in this case to the Prime Minister, Mr. Maud. I know that in every conversation we have with him on the phone, he raises a question, he expresses some thoughts about it. We are only grateful for this and welcome.
Начинаем закругляться, пожалуйста.
Well, we are already, so to speak, starting to wrap up. Please, Nadim Emirates.
Господин президент, также
To Hamter. And Mr. President.
хотел бы
Also,
продолжить вопрос коллеги из Бразилии.
I would like to continue the
Мухаммед
question.
бен Заид вскоре прибудет в Россию.
Muhammad
Вы
Zaev
встретитесь
will
с ним,
arrive in Russia
вы про
soon,
это уже
and you will
сказали.
meet with them.
Это действительно важный визит. У вас
This
был
is a
прекрасный
really
визит
important
в
visit.
Абу-Даби ранее.
You had a wonderful visit to Abu Dhabi.
Также мы
Earlier.
говорили о МУС,
We also talked.
о его
Fur.
деятельности.
Sheikh Mohammed.
Но что важно, Мухаммед бен Заид
Activities.
был в США, обсуждал
But, importantly, for
технологическое
this,
сотрудничество США.
I was in the USA.
И вот как вы
Technological
смотрите на ОАЭ?
cooperation.
Это
And that's how you
возможность
look at
выстраивать отношения
Opportunity.
с Ираном,
Build
США, с вами, с другими
relations with
странами,
Iran, with other
сотрудничать с
countries,
международными организациями, как МУС. Является ли это
cooperation
примером
with international
того,
organizations.
какую политику
Is
вы
it
в том
by
числе
example?
хотели бы вести?
What kind of policy would you like to pursue, among other things? Yes, this is a good example. And we have very good relations with the Arab Emirates. I have a very trusting, friendly contact with the president, and I am sure that his visit will be very fruitful.
Неофициальная его часть.
And the unofficial part of it,
Домой, вот здесь вот рядышком буквально.
I want to invite him right home, right here next to literally. We will have dinner, sit down, spend the evening together, talk about all current issues. Indeed, the President of the United Arab Emirates manages to maintain good, very business-like relations with many partners. And this in itself is of considerable value.
Поэтому посмотрим, действительно,
Therefore, let's see if Saudi Arabia has really done a lot, helped, including in the exchange of detained persons. And we are in the same contact with the United Arab Emirates.
с Объединенными Арабскими Эмиратами мы в таком же контакте. Экономические связи у нас развиваются, товарооборот подрастает.
Our economic ties are developing, and our trade turnover is growing. Of course, it's not like with China. There are not 240 billion, but the trend is positive. This is the first one. And secondly, our investment fund is working very well and successfully. And these are just specific issues of bilateral relations. As for the Middle East issues, we listen to the voice that the leadership of the United Arab Emirates formulates.
Формулирует руководство Объединенных Арабских Эмиратов. И, конечно, учитываем это и в своей практической политике.
And, of course, we take this into account in our practical policy. Please, China.
Вы только что обсуждали очень много вопросов безопасности. Я очень благодарен
There are a lot of questions.
за такой
I am very important.
китайско-российских отношений. МИД Китая опубликовал заявление о том, что председатель Си Цзиньпин посетит
China has published about what they will visit themselves.
под вашим с Си Цзиньпином стратегическим руководством двусторонние отношения переживают лучший период. Какие у вас планы или ожидания на более долгосрочную перспективу? Российско-китайские отношения сейчас очень перспективные. Говорим ли
Chinese relations. Promising, we say.
о новых производственных силах, которые Китай сейчас
In the new forces that China is now,
Manifests. Chinese,
the government, our e-commerce, about new areas. In your opinion, which areas have the greatest prospects for development in bilateral relations?
Очень активно работаем в сфере энергетики.
now we are very actively working in the energy sector. It is well known, and we will certainly develop this area. We are working on the creation of 2 units at nuclear power plants in China. We supply a large amount of energy resources, both oil and gas, and we will expand this cooperation. I have already said that this is useful for us and for our Chinese friends, a very reliable source, because it is not subject to any outside influences in any way. And this is such a basic thing. We are expanding cooperation in the field of agriculture. And we are grateful to our Chinese friends for opening up their market, including for the supply of agricultural products, meaning, say, pork and some other goods, where, of course, they correspond to China's interests. But these are, of course, such things of a traditional nature. But we must definitely look to the future. And one of the most important areas here is, of course, high-tech cooperation, infrastructure, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, genetics. This is space. Yes, please, Saudi Arabia.
Большое вам спасибо, господин президент. Благодарю вас
Thank you very much,
за уделенное
Mr.
время.
President.
И
Thank you
два коротких вопроса. Первый
for your
связан
time.
с
And 2 questions. The first one is connected.
с Павлом Дуровым, который имеет гражданство Франции, России,
S.
Эмиратов.
Pavel Durov, who has
Мы
citizenship.
знаем, что с ним происходило
France,
в последнее
Russia,
время.
Emirates.
Что Россия может
We
сделать,
know what's
чтобы
been
помочь
happening to him lately. What can Russia do to help him?
Касается
And the second
главы
question
парламента Ирана. Он сделал
concerns
странные заявления.
heads of the Iranian parliament. He made strange statements.
Реализации резолюции Совбеза 1701.
Implementations.
Он
Security
прокомментировал
Council Resolution
её достаточно негативном
1701.
ключе.
Did he comment on it in a rather negative way during contacts with the French?
Сделать Россия в рамках BRICS для того, чтобы
And what
наладить
can Russia do within the
отношения,
framework of the
скажем,
BRICS
Израиля
in order to improve relations between, say, Israel
и
and Iran?
есть ли угроза того, что будет серьезный конфликт между этими странами?
And if there is a threat that there will be a serious conflict between these countries?
Израилем и Ираном должны строить прежде всего
Relations between Israel and Iran should be built primarily by 2 countries, both Israel and Iran. This is their task. We cannot interfere in bilateral relations. A highly respected state in the Middle East, playing a significant role.
по поводу высказывания руководителя парламента.
Regarding the statement of the head of the Iranian parliament,
Комментировать высказывания руководителя.
I think that I hardly need to comment on the statements made by the heads of representative authorities of other countries.
Повторяю, очень добрые, союзнические, очень доверительные отношения.
We repeat very good, allied, very trusting relations with Iran.
Напряженные, сейчас все замерли в ожидании возможных ударов.
The situation is tense. Now everyone is frozen. Everyone is frozen in anticipation of possible strikes from Israel. I really hope that it will be possible to avoid the unwinding of this conflict.
Повторяю еще раз, мы готовы сделать все, что от нас зависит.
And, I repeat once again, we are ready to do everything that depends on us, as far as possible, if our role here is perceived positively.
Для того, чтобы
And so that the matter in the Gaza Strip eventually ends in peace and the cessation of these terrible strikes on civilian targets. And so that the situation in southern Lebanon normalizes, so that mutual strikes from one side and from the other stop. And so that peaceful life also returns to this territory.
чтобы прекратились взаимные удары с одной и с другой стороны, и чтобы на эту территорию тоже вернулась мирная жизнь. Мне кажется, что никто сейчас не заинтересован в раскручивании спирали.
It seems to me that no one is interested in unwinding the spiral of this conflict now. But no one. Not for security reasons, not for economic reasons. Therefore, it seems to me that there are chances to find a solution.
Прежде всего от стран вовлеченных.
But whether it will succeed or not, of course, depends primarily on the countries involved in this confrontation.
Наверное, уже закругляться. Пожалуйста, Египет.
Egypt, then Russia, and we will probably already wrap
Господин
up.
президент,
Egypt, please.
спасибо большое за это приглашение.
Mr. President,
Хотелось бы поговорить о
thank you for this invitation. I would like to talk about
которые в последнее время очень активно и сильно развиваются.
Russian relations, which have been
И
developing
ваши
very
отношения с
actively
Абдулладом
lately,
Фаттахом Сети этому содействуют.
and a good relationship with the fans.
Очень
All
много
of these
проектов,
contribute to this.
по развитию, которые
There are a lot
были
of development
начаты
projects
в
that have been
последнее
launched
время между
recently
Россией и
between
Египтом.
Russia,
Хотел
and
бы
understand what thoughts,
понять,
opinions regarding the
какое
future
ваше-
development
ваше
of these
мнение в
projects,
отношении будущего
and the
развития
future
этих проектов
development of
и
relations between the two
будущее
countries.
развитие отношений между двумя странами. Спасибо.
Традиционно очень теплые, дружеские.
Thank you. We have traditionally had very warm, friendly relations with Egypt for many, many decades.
Последние годы благодаря в значительной степени
And I am very pleased to note that in recent years, thanks largely to the President, these relations have been strengthening.
мы работаем.
Our trade turnover is growing.
Что это хорошо известно.
We are working on major projects. But suffice it to say that, as is well known, we are building a nuclear power plant. Everything is going according to plan. And I am sure that all these plans will be implemented. We need to move more actively about the industrial zone, which we have been talking about for a long time, and are taking rather modest steps there so far. Today, in his greeting to the BRICS business community, the President of Egypt also said this about the industrial zones in the Suez Canal zone. And we also have specific plans related to mechanical engineering, first of all. These are very interesting long-term projects that will be characterized not only by solid investments, but also by the development of cooperation. Industrial cooperation. In my opinion, this is extremely important. We will continue our joint work in the humanitarian sphere, including personnel training. And finally, we will continue our cooperation in the field of security. I hope we will continue our work in the field of military technical cooperation. And, in my opinion, our interaction, coordination of oppositions in the international arena is very important. This also concerns issues of ensuring security in the region. Vladimir Vladimirovich, the intonation in the West has changed in relation to Ukraine. If earlier they talked about the mandatory victory of Ukraine, about solving everything on the battlefield, now they are actively discussing the exchange of territories for the entry of the remnants of Ukraine into NATO. How do you like this idea? I don't understand when you talk about changing territories, because the territories that our guys are fighting for on the battlefield are our territory. These are the Luhansk People's Republic, the Donetsk People's Republic, the Zaporozhye region, and the Kherson region. That's the first one. Secondly, there is no doubt that we also need to resolve the issue of ensuring Russia's long-term security interests. If we are talking about some peace processes, then these should not be processes related to a truce for a week, for a year, in order for NATO countries to rearm and stock up with new ammunition. We need conditions for long-term sustainable and lasting peace that ensure equal security for all participants in this difficult process. And that's exactly what we should strive for. And the fact that someone once said about the need to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia, to ensure victory over Russia on the battlefield, well, they themselves have already convinced themselves that this is impossible. It is unrealistic and have changed their point of view. Well, you did the right thing. I'll praise you for that. Thank you very much. We still have a lot of questions, but we understand that our 2 hours have expired. Let's not abuse the politeness of the President of Russia. Many thanks from all of us for your sincerity and patience. I even wrote down some important things to myself, that BRICS is not an anti-Western organization, but simply not a Western one. I didn't say that, it's an example of fashion. Fashion. But you quote, 30 states are interested in cooperation with BRICS, which is very important. The issue of a single currency has not matured, but we need a reliable exchange of financial information, in fact an analog use of national currencies, and the wider use of national currencies that the US is 15 years late. No one meddles in the relations of other countries within the BRICS organization. But we treat everyone carefully, and the victory will be ours. Thank you very much. I want to thank you for organizing today's meeting. I would like to thank all my colleagues for working together today and for the interest you show in working at BRICS. The organization has good, stable, reliable prospects. I repeat once again, my confidence is based on the fact that we have real common values, a common understanding of how to build relationships with each other. And if countries such as India, China, Russia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and all other BRICS member countries, and there are already 10 of them, and with them those who show interest in BRICS, and there are already 30 of them, and there will be even more, everyone will be guided by these common of course. The organization will develop on this solid basis, and on this basis, it will be an essential element of a new world order. Multipolar, reliable from the point of view of security and development, for all the peoples included in this organization. I want to thank you for this joint work and express the hope that we are not meeting for the last time. I hope that your representatives or you yourself will work in Kazan, and we will do everything to ensure that the work goes on at the highest level. Thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich. We are very grateful to your press service, which treated us very carefully and carefully. And our last wish for today is a joint photo.